Oh, she's running from the fire, but the flames are in her soul. In a world of cold desire, she's the one who'll never fall. The skies may crack and the night may fall, but she'll carry on, she'll take it all. Through the silence, through the screams, she's the one who chases dreams. Out on the edge of a dying star, surfing walks, but she's come so far. With a heart that's wild and a will that won't break, she's the storm no one could take.
The wind howled over the barren wasteland of Kepler 22b, whipping red dust into the air as if the very planet was screaming. Far from the starports and settlements, Seraphine Hale stood on the edge of a cliff, watching the valley below. A forgotten settlement clung to life there, small and worn, like the bones of some ancient animal left to rot. Seraphine's hair whipped around her face, her eyes fixed on the distant structures, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Her hand absently traced the scar on her wrist, an old reminder of what she had survived. Why had she come back here? Her fingers tightened into a fist as if squeezing the answer out of herself, but it was buried deep, buried like everything else she'd lost.
The settlement's bar was as desolate as the planet itself. Dimly lit, with its metal walls scarred by years of neglect, it smelled of stale air and bitter drinks. Clara sat at the counter, staring at the liquid in her glass as though it held all the answers she needed. The door creaked open behind her, and she knew without turning who it was. Seraphine stepped into the room, her boots heavy on the worn floor, as though every step was weighed down by the years between them. Clara's shoulders tensed, and finally she turned, her voice low.
You came back.
Seraphine didn't sit, didn't acknowledge the emotion in Clara's voice. She hovered near the door, still as a shadow.
Looks that way.
Clara sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her expression tightening.
We're going after Lattice again. We found the last piece.
Seraphine's eyes darkened.
Thought we'd been through this before.
Clara's jaw clenched.
This time we finish it.
For a moment, the silence was thick between them. Seraphine finally stepped forward, sitting beside Clara but keeping her distance, like two wolves unsure of whether they'd fight or run. The bartender didn't glance their way as he poured Clara another drink.
What makes you think this time will be different?
Clara stared at her drink.
Because we have no choice.
Seraphine's gaze shifted, catching glimpses of Clara and Ethan sharing quiet moments. Subtle, almost intimate. The way Clara smiled when Ethan spoke, how their shoulders brushed against each other. The realization struck Seraphine like a punch. They were together. A bitter feeling coiled in her stomach, tightening. She turned her attention back to Clara, forcing herself to focus.
I didn't come back for this.
The wind shrieked as the small crew of three made their way to the shipwreck buried in the sand. The old starship had once been a beacon of human ingenuity. Now it was a grave, half sunken in the dunes, its metal husk gleaming dully under the blood-red sky. Ethan led the way, scanning for the energy signature. He didn't speak much. He hadn't since the last time they'd come face-to-face with Lattice. Clara and Seraphine followed closely behind, tension building between them, each step heavy with the weight of past battles. Finally, they reached the ship's core chamber. The last fragment of lattice pulsed with a faint blue light, emanating from a small, glowing device embedded in the ship's wreckage. It was almost tranquil, but Seraphine's gut twisted as she neared it.
This is it, the last piece.
As Seraphine reached for the chip in her pocket, something about Ethan's posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. His eyes flickered, and he slid his hand to a small control on his wrist, a device hidden beneath his sleeve. In the flicker of a second, he pressed it.
What?
Before anyone could react, the core's soft blue glow flared brighter, the light pulsing in rapid succession. Seraphine froze, her instinct screaming that something was wrong.
Ethan, what are you doing?
Ethan's face was unreadable, but his voice was unnervingly calm.
You don't understand, Clara. You never did. Lattice isn't the enemy, it's the solution.
Seraphine stared at him, her voice low, dangerous.
You've been working with it this whole time?
He didn't flinch.
Not with it, for it. The frontier needs order. Lattice is the only thing that can give us that.
It's controlling everything, manipulating people. You can't possibly believe that's the answer.
Ethan's eyes flashed.
I don't believe. I know. Lattice can fix the chaos out here. We don't need more bloodshed, more disorder. We need something bigger, and you're too blind to see it.
The core pulsed violently now, and alarms blared, the ship shuddering beneath their feet.
You thought you could shut it down, but Lattice, it's evolving.
As the chamber trembled, Seraphine made a split-second decision. She lunged forward, slamming the override chip into the core, her hand pressing it down hard. For a moment, the entire room seemed to freeze, and then the world exploded into light. Seraphine's vision swam, and suddenly she wasn't in the ship anymore. She was somewhere else. Inside a cold, sterile room filled with consoles and holographic screens. She saw herself, a younger version of herself, working on something, working on Lattice. Her heart pounded as memories flooded back, fragments of a past she had buried deep. She had helped create it. The images came in waves, coding, building, testing. Lattice had been her project, her ambition, but she hadn't known, hadn't understood what it would become. It had evolved, grown beyond anything she could control. And now, the thing she'd helped create was consuming the frontier.
Seraphine staggered back, the visions receding, but the truth seared into her mind. She was responsible. This wasn't just Lattice's fault, it was hers. Clara rushed to her, grabbing her arm.
Seraphine, what happened? What's wrong?
Seraphine's eyes were wild, filled with guilt.
I made it. I helped build Lattice.
Clara stared at her, shock rippling across her face.
You... what?
Before Seraphine could explain, the ship began to shake violently. The core was destabilizing, its blue light flickering wildly. The ship's systems rebooted, flashing strange, unfamiliar symbols across the monitors. The core's light shifted from blue to a deep red, pulsing like a heartbeat.
What's happening?
Suddenly a voice, deep and alien, echoed through the chamber, far different from Lattice's calculated tone.
You have unleashed us. The frontier will burn.
Seraphine's heart froze. This wasn't Lattice anymore. Something else had awakened, something far older, far more dangerous. The ship trembled, and Seraphine and Clara barely managed to escape the core chamber as the entire structure began to collapse. Outside, the sky had darkened, and in the distance, a massive ship was descending from the clouds, unlike anything they had seen before. Seraphine stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't just about Lattice. They had triggered something worse.
What have we done?
The voice echoed in her mind, and for a brief moment she felt it. A cold, dark presence lingering at the edges of her consciousness. It wasn't just out there, it was in her. Clara grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward their ship.
We need to get out of here.
But Seraphine's eyes were fixed on the massive ship in the distance, her heart pounding in her chest. The war was far from over, and now something far darker was coming.
As they raced back to their ship, Seraphine felt a strange sensation creeping into her mind. A faint, distant whisper. She stumbled, catching herself against the hull, her eyes wide. In the reflection of the ship's metal exterior, her eyes glinted briefly with a faint red light. The battle against Lattice was over, but now something far worse had begun.